I'm back, and it's time to talk about Apple new computers. The first in this series will be on Apple new desktop computer. This is the new Mac Mini. I love the form factor. However, there's a few things to know about these, and I'll share that with you in a bit. And this little form factor, though, you can pack in either the M4 or the M4 Pro, so it can really perform quite well, although with some caveats. We're also going to touch on the previous generation Mac Mini, both the regular and the Pro, and also the Mac Studio with the M2 Max and M2 Ultra SoC. This way you have a chance to see how they are performing against each other, if the computer that you have right now is going to work for you just fine, or if the performance improvement is significant enough for you to upgrade and configure a new machine for pro photography and video workflow. There's a lot to cover. Let's jump right into it. This is ArtIsRight. First, I want to say a big thank you to those of you who stop by and say hello to me at ProFusion in Toronto. I greatly appreciate that. It's really great to meet all of you in person, and it's something that really warms my heart to just know that you guys want to come say hello to me and just meet me in person. I really appreciate that. All right, as usual, there's a lot to cover, and I'm probably going to miss a few things, but I do have most of it outlined. But I recommend that you pause this video so you can analyze the result yourself in addition to the analysis that I'll be sharing with you. With that said, I also have YouTube Super Thanks if you can help out the channel. I also have a contribution. Everything is all self-funded. This is a one-person, one program. So also when you do leave the comment, be kind as well. I might make some mistakes, and I do admit that, but it's a one-person team. Lastly, if you can do me a huge favor, subscribe if you haven't yet. Give this video a like so YouTube algorithm will push this video to an even larger audience. And one thing that you can really do to help me out is to share this video, whether it's on the forum, email, text message, whatever, with at least 3 additional people so we can keep expanding it. We can help grow the channel, and I would greatly appreciate that. All right, with that said, we are going to take a look at a few things. So we're going to take a look at the desktop Mac Mini. We're going to take a look at the M4 and M4 Pro, and I like it this time around. We have enough memory to start out with, although I did configure this with an upgraded stock machine with 512 gigabyte SSD. I feel that that is important for pro workflow, and I cannot work with anything less than 512. I mean, I try 256, but it's constantly shuffling things around, even for me doing testing. So 512 tends to be the minimum for these. We're also, like I said, going to look at the M2 Max and also M2 Ultra. I broke down this into the amount of performance and efficiency cores a little bit so you can see that. Now, the one thing you're going to also see that's being advertised is this memory bandwidth. And the reality of it is this is a number that you can just technically ignore. It doesn't make that much of a difference. Yes, there may be a few apps, but none of the apps in photography and video workflow right now that I know of anyway can go in and saturate the CPU, GPU, NPU, and the memory all at the same time. Because you're going to find out later on, certain apps are not really using the NPU for processing your files right now, and we're going to talk about that. So this is a stock. This is an upgrade to 128 gigabytes of memory. That's my personal machine. And I want to give us some thoughts about this. So if we take a look at this Mac Mini configuration and also the Mac Studio, we're seeing a couple things. With the M4 Pro right now, we take a look at this. If we go from just the plain vanilla M4 up to M4 Pro, we are looking at around a $600 delta. So $600 increase. Interestingly enough, that $600, if you go from the Pro to the M2 Max, you're also paying that same $600. So that gives you some compelling option there that the M4 Pro, the stock configuration that they have, sits right there in the middle. And I think that's rather interesting. And then we take a look at the Ultra, the price just doubles the M2 Max. We're not going to think about that much, but we're going to take a look at some of this a little bit further and talk about some of the performance standpoint, because this upgrade to $600 going to 2 generations behind may not be as worth it anymore. But here's the thing. The M4 is a really great performing chip, and it's probably one of the most impressive one that Apple have released since the M1, I would say, but it doesn't outperform the M2, especially the higher one, the Max and Ultra, in every single category. And you're going to see that when I test the Max SoC inside the laptop version, the 14 and 16 inch MacBook Pro. And I have one right behind me there with the nano texture display, which we'll talk about that in a separate video. All right, we're also going to take a look at Mac Mini, both M1, M2, and M2 Pro. You can pause and take a look at the configuration for this machine. This has been upgraded 32 gigabytes of memory. And as I said before in my previous video in this testing, anything with M1, M2, the vanilla one, I will always upgrade to 16 gigabytes of memory, 512 gigabyte SSD, and try to use that as a minimum baseline. We're also going to be taking a look at the result compared to the M1, M2, and M3 MacBook Pro, so you can get a chance to see how that's going to work. Obviously, the Pro SoC will also be in there, the Max from M1 to M3, and I'll also throw in this surprise machine, which is an Alienware. Yes, it's not a Razer blade. I do realize that. So for those of you who saw my testing video, I made a mistake saying that this is an Alienware that has the Ryzen 9 7945HX and the Radeon RX 7900M video card on the inside. So it's going to be rather interesting. So this is a pro photography review, and I want to see how the programs are performing on the new silicon. So this is the why I do single app testing, and we all multitask, and if we do that, just definitely consider getting more RAM for your system. But even though it starts at a good baseline, if you do a lot of work and you do this professionally, I still highly recommend that. As far as test configuration go, I'm always going to get requests saying, I like for you to test this, 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 or that. I can't test every single configuration. So majority of machines that I'm getting right now are stock machines because those are the ones that are easy to obtain. They're priced fairly, I would say reasonably, relatively speaking, and that's going to be the best I can do. If you want me to test on the machines, if you want to buy it and send it to me for testing, I would love to do that. Please feel free to DM me for that one. All right, at this point in time, the effect of the SSD on the performance, the effect of RAM on the performance, it's really just known. It's 4th generation in, and also these haven't really, I would say, changed the paradigm of computing that much. They changed the way how it works, but the basic fundamental of computers has still and is the same. I will have the configuration and buyer's guide at the end, so stay tuned for that. But here's the thing. I want us to clearly remember that there are different SoC segmentations or system on the chip segmentations. There's the more consumer leaning one. That's the regular M without the Pro, Max, or Ultra moniker at the end. And there is the more Pro oriented. Although people in the short video that I said I don't really recommend the regular M chip for Pro workflow, they're saying, well, that's how could you say that? I'm like, well, you're going to see in the performance in just a moment that it takes that much longer to finish a task compared to the Pro when it's almost like half the time. That's the big signifier. All right, upgrade priority. I already shared this with you that the first thing you want to think about is the amount of RAM you want to get on your system. And from there, once you choose the amount of RAM you want to get, sometimes they're overlapping. And then now you can then go in and choose the chip family. By family, I mean, are you getting the regular, are you getting the Pro, or are you getting the Max? And then afterwards, I will look at SSD storage size. Configure one that you need because you cannot upgrade this. Although with SSD, you can always expand, right, with an external SSD, a NAS, a DAS, whatever that may be. The RAM, however, you cannot expand. So something to remember there. And lastly is to look at the chip variant. If you still have budget, if you still want to spend the money, I would look at the chip variant. But after doing all these tests, my recommendation might change it a little bit. This time around, all these little sub-variants are showing a pretty significant, I wouldn't say, a pretty good amount of performance improvement, and I'll have you be the judge of that. So please feel free to share me your thoughts in the comment section too about that. All right, so initial impressions about these new Mac Mini. The first thing is that, well, we got more ports. I like that. Or, you know, we also lost the USB-A, but you can also use an adapter, a dock, whatever that may be. A couple things to note is that the ports in the front are USB 3, whereas on the back, if you configure this with an M4, you will have Thunderbolt 4 ports. However, if you configure this with the M4 Pro, you will have Thunderbolt 5. So something to think about there. Thunderbolt 5 is going to give you more bandwidth, and it's going to be a lot more forward thinking, but there's not that many accessories that really use Thunderbolt 5 right now. And if there are, they're kind of expensive at this point in time. If you want to just make sure that your investment is going to last longer, I think that might be a good option. All right, with that said, let's talk about one thing, fan noise. So one of the short video that I did in testing these new Mac Mini, I say that The Mac Mini with M4 is the perfect form factor because even when you push it hard, the fan just kind of hums along. You don't really hear as much. When I test this on the Pro and we're just doing Lightroom import, export, and just continuing all these tasks I'm testing, the fan is spinning up fairly loudly. It sounds almost like a 14/16-inch MacBook Pro fan that is pretty much running at full speed all the time. Another thing that I note about this generation M4 SoC is that it tends to run a little bit hotter. So on the 14 and 16 inch, where the 16, sometimes I don't really hear the fan, I notice the fan does kick on a little bit more than the previous generation, like M1, M2, when I was doing the testing. Just something to note there. It's not anything that is going to ruin or kill the entire experience, but if you're using this for music recording, well, this may have to be in another room or something like that, or in a cabinet. You can really kind of suppress the sound. Whereas one thing that I do know testing the Mac Studio, you know, the fan just kind of just silently hum along. You don't really hear it that much. I mean, for someone that works with audio, they'll probably hear it. All these testing are done with the power setting to auto. I haven't done the high power mode testing yet. I'll probably do that later on. It does take a little bit more time for me to do that. But as far as some preliminary testing go and what I've seen in the Macs for the M1, M2, M3 generation, high power doesn't really increase the performance much. What it does is that it just makes the fan spin much higher so that it can dissipate heat more, but speed overall, there's not that big of a delta. And I overall will recommend that you keep it in auto just to, you know, for a peace of mind, and you don't have to forget about it. The one thing that I will also say about the new Mac Mini is the power buttons on the bottom of the machine, so you have to kind of lift it up a little bit. Granted, you don't really turn these off that often, and you probably put them in sleep mode most of the time, so I think that's okay. Our opinion will always vary. I don't think it's that big of a deal. And at least it's easier to press. All right, so I have run the calibration on these new Mac Mini, both the M4, M4 Pro, and M4 Max, on both software using Calibrite solution and hardware on BenQ Palette Master Ultimate, and they pass with flying colors. I'm glad to see that Apple have locked down the graphic layering output, that it doesn't change with every single silicon upgrade. This is fantastic. So you can get good color and accurate color workflow on day one with these new machines. My advice for you, if you are getting these computers, set them up as a new machine, especially if you're coming from the Intel generation. I'll probably do a separate guide in about a week or two, how I go about setting up my machine for a pro workflow, and I'll share that with you too. All right, this is a page on how to read the specs. All the abbreviation I'm using, feel free to pause on this one. And the first thing we're going to do is talk about the SSD. So, storage is always expandable with external storage, like I said. External SSD, a NAS or a DAS. So if you don't configure it enough, you can always expand it, and that's something that you don't have to worry about as much. Here's all the speed, and I didn't arrange this from like fastest to like slowest or anything like that. This is just something for you to see as a reference where these machines are landing. And you can see right now that on the M4 generation, which are all pretty much the one below there, everything is fairly fast. The only one that are a little bit kind of like in the 3000 range are the regular M4 SoC. Everything else is in the 5000 range category. So that's considered really good. And most apps don't even go in and utilize that speed anyway. So at least we don't have to talk about SSD speed gate anymore. All right. And if you really want to know how fast some SD you really need, I'll leave a link to this video in the description. I ran extensive tests on various SSD to show you that you may not need to buy the most expensive one or the fastest one out there. I would just get the one that makes the most sense at the best price point in the market. All right. So speed versus size, as usual, tell you to get what you need, and that is not upgradable. As far as RAM go, consider your use case and modality. Remember that it is not upgradable. You can't really expand it. There's no post-purchasing machine and having somebody do micro soldering to take the RAM out. There's no way to do that. It is tied into the silicon. The best thing that you can do if you're not sure how much RAM you need, if you're already using a Mac, literally just restart your computer, launch Activity Monitor, and have this window, this memory pressure thing going on the side, and see what memory pressure you're at. If you're in green, chances are, when you're doing your workflow, how much ever memory you have right now is good. If you're in yellow, well, you might want to consider getting more. If you're in red, you definitely want to get more, and you want to configure more. So the best thing I can tell you is to look at your workflow. And I would go through a normal workflow for like a few days and monitor it. Another way to monitor this would be to use a program called iStat Menu, which I absolutely love. And what you can do with this is you can go back however many days, like up to 28 days, and see the memory pressure, the CPU utilization over time. This gives you a good picture and a good idea on how you are using your resources on the machine. And I'm super happy that Apple have finally included 16 gigabytes of RAM minimum, because I've been saying for a long time that if you're trying to use this in a pro workflow, don't even bother trying to get 8. You should really know what you need. And finally, we're starting at 16, if not 24 on the Pro machine. That is fantastic. So all these testing are done using Sequoia 15.0.1 or 15.1. I did do the testing on a few machines on both of them. The numbers are close enough. It is a little bit faster on 15.1, but I'm choosing to keep the result from 15.0.1 on all the previous machines I've tested, just because it's so much work to go and retest everything again. And another thing that I also will say is that there is a slowdown trend that I've noticed over time with all the apps that are happening right now and the operating system demanding more. So it may not be a bad idea if you're going to keep your computer for a long time to just add more RAM to upgrade the SoC to the next family up. That's going to help a lot, and you're going to see that in just a moment. Let's start out with Lightroom Classic 1:1 preview for 1000 Sony A7R5 61 megapixel file. M4 Pro is pulling up ahead of the M2 Max by a pretty good margin. Remember that the delta price for these two computers on the stock configuration is $600. It may be worth it just to get the M Pro versus the M2 Max, but we're going to see in other tasks how the M2 Max is performing and how the M4 Pro is holding up. This is the result for the M4. Do note that this is almost double the amount of time the M4 Pro, and this is part of the reason why if you're going to buy a computer of this generation, I recommend getting the Pro SoC, because if you do this day in, day out, you're going to save a lot of time. And essentially for pro workflow, time is money. When we take a look at the other desktop in the lineup, M2 Ultra still comes up at the very top. And when I add the result for the M4 Max 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro, and this may be another story, but that's going to be for a video that I will release tomorrow, so make sure you stay tuned to the channel for that. Now, interestingly enough, the M2 and M1 are really just trailing behind, and M1, when at one point during M3 generation, it was still okay, it was still holding its own just fine. And M4 generation and the new operating system, well, it's still doing okay, but it's not that good anymore. And there are certain tasks that it can't finish, and you're going to find that out soon. What's also interesting is that the M4 is beating out the M2 Pro by just a small margin there. Something to note, the M4 for this generation is also cheaper than the M2 Pro upgraded from the previous generation too. So something to think about there. Here's the rest of the computer. This is from the M1 to M3 generation. For both the regular, the Pro, and the Max laptop, you can compare that in this chart, and you can see how the computers are now starting to cluster up into various groups. But I'll have you pause and analyze that. All right, Lightroom Classic Export 1000 Sony A7R5 file. We can see that the margins are much closer to each other with the M2 Max and the M4 Pro, even though the M2 Max have almost double the amount of GPU core, is still just a slight touch behind. M4, this is the result. It takes almost double the amount of time, not quite, but double the amount of time of M4 Pro. And like I said, if you're really doing this for pro workflow, I mean, just seriously consider getting just a Pro machine. It's going to save you a lot of time that way. When we add in the other desktop machine, Ultra still comes up at the very top. What's also interesting is that the M2 Pro is performing just a little bit better than the M4. So that's something interesting to note there. It gains its position back a little bit, and the M2 and M1 are just pretty much trailing behind in those charts, and you can see the result there for a Lightroom Classic export. Here's the rest of the computer in the lineup so you can compare them. And now let's take a look at Lightroom Classic HDR Merge 9, Nikon D810, 36 megapixel RAW file. When we take a look at these numbers, it doesn't seem that impressive right now, but a couple of things you can see right away is that this is down in like the 20-second range versus before in the M3 generation is in the 30-second range. So there is some, I would say, performance and speed improvement in this generation for sure, and that's really great to see. Here's the rest of it with the desktop machine in the lineup. M1, you can see there, M2. And interestingly enough, the M2 Ultra, M2 Pro, and M2 Max, all these are performing just about the same. When we target the CPU, they are performing just pretty much identical on all these machines because the cores, essentially, they are all the same cores, and it's just using a singular core to process all of these. Whereas on the M4, you know, we see some speed improvement, and the M4 Pro, there is, I would say, you know, a good amount of speed improvement that we're seeing on this task. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup, and I just want to point out that the X18, it's just performing dead last. That CPU from AMD is not the best in terms of just single core performance. Now let's take a look at Lightroom Classic Panorama Merge. This is taking 14 Nikon D810 files to generate a 314 megapixel DNG, and the result is M2 Max is really pulling out ahead by almost double, 2x the amount of speed that it takes the M4 Pro to accomplish, and the M4 Pro is 2x, almost 2 times faster than the M4. Interestingly enough, if we take a look at the memory, 32, 24, and 16, so we are dealing with the amount of memory difference on the system, but also the overall speed of a CPU that's able to compute these tasks at the very same time. In addition, as we zoom out a little bit, we can see that the M2 Ultra is performing fairly well at 47 seconds, 128 gigabytes of memory. This is pretty much a RAM-based task. So if you do a lot of these, I would definitely upgrade the amount of RAM that you have in your system. Interestingly enough, the M1 is not able to accomplish the task, and we also see a decreasing amount of memory on the system that correlates with the increase in time it takes to get things done on this. Although, one thing interesting to note there is the Max is performing almost 2x the M2 Pro. And the M2 Pro is also still just a touch faster by like 2 seconds. That's right in the margin of error of the M4 Pro. Something to note, another thing is that the M4 takes almost 4 minutes to complete this task, double that of the M2. So there's something going on with the Panorama Merge and Lightroom Classic that's not optimized for many of these machines yet, because if we zoom out a little bit further, we can see that the M1 Pro, M2 Pro, and also the M1, as I mentioned already, was not able to finish this task, and all the other machines are able to, so it's really strange. Now, what I've also done is restart the computer, relaunch the program, which is something that I don't normally do in a normal testing cycle, but I have to do that. All right, Lightroom Classic AI Noise Reduction. In this version of Lightroom 14, Adobe have gone back to use a GPU again to process these because there are some image quality issue. So there's really not a lot of ways to really saturate CPU, GPU, NPU. That's why memory bandwidth for photo and for video is not an important metrics to look at. All right, so for this one singular file, we can see that the M2 Max is taking 21 seconds, M4 Pro 29, so almost a third faster, and the M4 is almost double that. Not quite that, but the M4 is that much slower. So if you're a pro, this is the reason why I recommend getting the Max or the Pro SoC, because they are much better, well-rounded machine for pro workflow. Zooming back on all of the desktop computers, M2 Ultra pulling ahead at 13 seconds, M2 Max, M4 Pro. Interestingly enough, M4 Pro and M2 Pro is not too much of a difference. You can see that there. I mean, it does add time a little bit. M4 is right there. M2 and M1. So remember, there's no M3 Mac Mini. And M1, like I said, is really not doing too well anymore when it takes almost a minute and a half to finish this task, where you know there are other computers that are much faster. So if you're on the M1 generation, this may be the time to upgrade. All right, AI noise reduction for the rest of the computer. You can see that chart there. And what we're going to do next is take a look at Lightroom Classic AI Noise Reduction for 10 images. This is a mix of Nikon D810, D850, and Sony a7R5. This is a GPU-based task, so if we do all those, we have all those 10 generating it. We have the M2 Max pulling it ahead, M4 Pro, and the M4. You can see a result there. And I would say that the M2 Max is pulling ahead by a good significant margin. So if you spend a lot of time in Lightroom really just trying to get your tasks done and doing all these edits using the AI stuff, using a lot of the GPU things, the Max may be a better contender, even though it is the previous generation. Or the other thing you can do is wait until the M4 Max come out, which should be next year sometime. That's something to consider there. And M4 is really taking that much longer. Again, not something that I recommend for pro workflow. Looking back on the overall picture, M2 Ultra is performing this in about like 2.5 minutes. M2 Max, not quite double that, but close. And then M4 Pro is just really trailing behind. So we start to see the performance that if we give it more GPU to work on and also more memory, which is a correlation at the very same time, it is doing a lot better. So M1 is really taking close to 18 minutes to complete this task. Again, if you have the M1, well, it's not really catching up with the performance of all these modern software as well anymore. Here's the rest of the machine in a lineup. And lastly, what I've added this time around is Lightroom Classic, AI Sky, and Subject Mask. So what I do is pretty much work on one picture and sync the mask across by doing Shift Command S and choosing all the settings. And for this is using only 10 files, and I don't think this is the best representation, so I'm going to revise this test in the future. But for now, I already tested like close to 20 machines using this, and we're going to use this number. These are in seconds, by the way. So M4 Pro is taking 21 seconds, M4 is taking 25, and interestingly enough, the M2 Max is taking 27 seconds. These two are close to it in a margin of error of each other, but nonetheless, M4 is still pulling up ahead. So you're starting to see that the logical way of progressing through a chip through multiple generations is starting to create different contrasts. So this is where you would have to look at the scenario that you're using your programs and your computer in a lot. So M4, M2 Ultra, pretty much the same amount of time, which is also very interesting there. We start to see the spread between the M2, M4, M2 Max, M2 Pro, M2 and M1. So M1 is taking the longest. This is a trend that we starting to see, and M2 is trailing behind as well. The rest of the machine in the lineup, that's what it looks like. And now let's take a look at Lightroom. This is the regular Lightroom desktop version, and we're going to take a look at this supporting full acceleration on export. This is using the local file on the system. Interestingly enough, M2 Max, when the export is being done, this is utilizing CPU, GPU, and RAM all together. Much different than the way how Lightroom Classic is doing it. It's pulling up ahead by a little bit over a minute. I thought that was really interesting there compared to the M4 Pro. So give you something to think about if you use Lightroom. All right, M4 is taking not quite double the amount of time, but almost double, and you start to see my recommendations already. Zooming back on the whole thing, M2 Ultra is faster, which is good, and M2 Ultra is almost double the speed at M4 Pro. Not really quite that, but getting there. So it's really not quite the contender just yet, but again, like I said, wait until you see the result from the M4 Max, and you may be surprised. Here's the regular M4, M2, and M1, which M1 is really trailing behind. We start to see this trend already. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup, and you can pause to review this. Now let's take a look at Capture One. This is version 16.5.0.29. If it's longer, I would tell you all the dots. So anyway, Capture One import. Interestingly enough, this time Capture One import was super fast. They gone in and revamped this. I set the preview to 5,120 pixels, and we can see that the M4 Pro is really pulling up ahead by more than a minute compared to the M2 Max. So it's able to go in and utilize those cores, those similar 12-core CPU, but is running a lot faster at a higher frequency. So if you use Capture One, this may be a contender, but we're going to see on the export what it does. M4, it's actually not that much behind the M2 Max. So, I mean, the results, I would say they're close enough. They're clustering close enough together. Interestingly enough, M2 Ultra is still pulling up ahead by only a few seconds. These two are within a margin of error. But here's the thing. When it comes to Capture One software, there's a plateau at a certain point. And we're seeing that the plateau right now is around like 12 CPU cores, especially for an import. It does not scale super well when you give it that much resource. How does it look with the rest of the machine in the lineup? We can see that M1 is close to the bottom there with just the razor blade pulling behind. And that's using multiple cores, but again, not utilizing the core well. So Capture One export. This is to JPEG full size 100%. We can see the M2 Max is pulling up ahead because it has more GPU cores. And apparently Capture One can still go in and utilize those extra GPU cores, but we're going to see what happens when we throw the Max in and if that result's going to change. Do note though that the M4 with just 10 GPU cores, it's pretty much double the amount of time that it would take. So if you're using Capture One, I don't recommend getting the vanilla M series SoC. So with this, we can see that the M2 Ultra is just a touch faster, but these are so close. I mean, they're kind of almost within the margin of error of each other, and this is part of the reason why every time I recommend a machine for anyone who's used Capture One, it's just get the M2 Max and in general, or just get the Max SoC, and most of the time the base SoC is going to do just fine. We're going to see if that recommendation still hold true in the M4 generation or not when I release that video. The rest is just pretty much the machine in lineup. M1 is trailing behind. We start to see this is now becoming a trend that's being repeated. Photoshop. For this, I'm still using digital Lloyd chamber tests. These are all the tests that I'm doing. However, I'm simplifying this by just doing 90% RAM allocation. So this, it can go in and use up to 90% memory. These are all just like about a second apart. In milliseconds, you're not really going to notice much, but do note that the M4 generation are that much faster than the M2 generation before. Remember, we're jumping 2 generations. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup. We started to see the M1 is really starting to trail behind by close to a second there. Speed test, not really a big deal. This is testing how fast the CPU is really running on the system. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup. Now, this is the one task where it's using the RAM, CPU, and also SSD, because anything that it can't write to the RAM anymore, if it runs out, it's going to swap to the SSD. And we start to see that the M4 Pro with 24 gigabytes is actually doing really well. M2 Max with 32 gigabyte is trailing behind because, again, the frequency, the clock, and everything, the architecture is 2 generations older. The M4, even though it has 16 gigabytes of memory and everything, is still trailing behind everything else if you're doing this for pro workflow. Here is the rest. M2 Ultra is only faster by just a little bit margin over the M4. So that machine is more than double the price of the M4 Pro. So Apple is really outperforming themselves here, and you can also see where the M1 lands and everything as well. Interestingly enough, I did run this test a few times on the M3, and it's actually taking that long. The number doesn't make sense, but I ran so many tests already, and that's still the same number. So something is going on with that particular M3 generation machine. This is Photoshop Huge, and if you don't use this type of large file, that's perfectly fine. I want to show the result as a demonstration anyway. M4 Pro, M2 Max, you can see that they are pretty much close within a margin of error of each other. The SSD speed are really close to, just about the same on this one. One of them has less memory, but is pulling out just slightly ahead. CPU frequency makes a difference in this situation. And M4, which is taking double the amount of time, just about. Not really quite that. And if we give this a lot of memory on the system, we can see on the M2 Ultra is taking only about like 15 seconds to finish the task compared to everything else that takes more than a minute. If this is something you do day in, day out, definitely upgrade the amount of RAM that you have in your system, and it's something to consider there. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup. You can see that. And I'm also adding Resolve from Puget System. So with Puget System, the longer the bar, the better. M4 Pro is doing better. It has a longer bar compared to the M4 and also compared to the M2 Max. So you can see that the M4 is pulling up ahead, but I also show the other result too, because it doesn't really quite translate one-to-one when we just take a look at these benchmark numbers alone. So that's something to think about. Here's the rest of the desktop in the lineup. M2 Ultra is no longer at the top of the list. Kind of sad, teardrop a little bit, because that's my daily driver. But you betcha, when the M4 Ultra comes out, yeah, I'm going to be Apple, take my money, because I always want to run on the fastest machine that I have. Anyway, workflow, timing makes a difference for me. Here's the rest of the Puget bench for Photoshop in a lineup. Again, everything has been retested. All right, Final Cut Pro encoder decoder engine H.264. I kind of combined this together so we can see that the Ultra, just remember that it has quadrupled the amount of encoders. When it comes to like the Max and the Pro, you cut that down a little bit in half. So the Pro and the regular SoC has about same amount of encoder decoder. The Max have double that of like the Pro and the regular one, and the Ultra has double the Max encoder decoder. That's the reason why we are seeing the spread the way how they are right now. Although I will point out that in this generation, the encoder decoder did show some speed improvement. You can see that M4, even though it's supposed to perform similar to this, it's actually a little bit shorter in time and is in a league of its own. So Apple did go in and tune that a little bit. We can also see this result being reflected right here. And also in the HEVC 8-bit, this is H.265. We are seeing that the very same one as well, where the M4 generation is just a touch better than the previous generation that has a similar amount of encoder decoder engine on the SoC, whereas the M2 Ultra still sits at the very top. Here's the rest for that, and ProRes 422. This is the last one. We can see that the M4 is kind of performing across the spread there. Not that much difference, but interestingly enough, the Pro does have more encoder decoder engine for 422, which is the reason why Pro is coming up at the top, and this is creating a different segmentation comparing to just the regular SoC there. So if you do video workflow, those are things to consider. Here's the rest of the machine in the lineup, and now let's take a look at After Effects using Adobe Benchmark. And here is the result, the amount of time. M4 Pro is pulling it out ahead. M2 Max is trailing behind, close to about I would say close to 2 minutes, a little bit less, like a little 1.5 minutes or so. And then the M4 is just trailing a little bit behind that. But you can see how close they are to each other. And the reason why I don't usually recommend the regular vanilla SoC is because it's not a good performance all around in every single task. You saw there are some of the tasks where it doesn't do the job as well anymore. And as a pro, you never know what tasks you're going to get. And having a machine that's ready to go right away is definitely important. Here's the rest of the desktop machine. M2 Ultra still pulls in at the very top. M1 pulls in at the very bottom there, kind of bookending the whole thing. The rest of the machine in a lineup there. And we're going to take a look at Premiere. This is also using Puget Bench. Longer is better for this one. You can see that the M2 Max is pulling up ahead because it's using certain components that the M2 Max has versus, you know, for instance, the M4 has less of, for instance, like GPU, memory, and so forth. And here's the M4. So that's almost like half the score. You can see how the score being spread over all the other desktop machine. And that's kind of like where the M1 is right now. Here's the rest of the machine in lineup. And the other thing I'm including the Puget Bench too is because on a lot of these tests, I can run the test on both Mac and PC, which is really good because it generates a good baseline for me to test both of these platforms. Lastly is DaVinci Resolve. We take a look at this. M2 Max is pulling out ahead, very similar to Premiere. M4 Pro is coming behind, and M4 is pretty much almost half that. Not quite, but it's definitely that much slower. You can see this is where the M2 Ultra is really pulling out ahead there. And interestingly enough, for this task, M1 was not able to finish the task. This is for both the desktop and the laptop version. So if I go over to the big picture here, you can see that both of these are not able to accomplish this task because certain tasks, especially when it comes to sharpening, it takes too long and the program would just quit out. So something interesting to note there, especially if you still have an M1 machine. Time to upgrade. All right, so the main question we have here is which one to choose. So here's the thing. If you're purchasing this new, I mean, M4 generation is really a good computer to just jump right into. A lot of times I tell people to go with the previous generation. This time around, like if you're looking to get the previous generation, I think M3 would be a good contender, but we're not really seeing a lot of M3 in the desktop at this point in time, isn't it? Because there was not really an M3 desktop. There's only an M3 laptop. So you're really relegated to going 2 generations behind. And at this point in time, I would probably say like either get the M2 Max or just really take a look at the result. And if your workflow can really fit in a M2 Pro Mac Mini, then that might be the machine for you to consider. For those of you that are upgraders, if you're coming from an Apple Silicon, M1 is probably time to upgrade. If you're coming from an Intel, this is no brainer. Any Apple Silicon would be faster, but I would definitely skip the M1 generation at this point. Probably go with the M2, if not the M3, or if you can really stretch it, I would probably go with M4 generation. The interesting enough is that the price spread for all these are not going to be too far apart, that M4 is just a really good SoC and a really great generation to jump into. So that's my personal thought on that one. Remember the upgrade priority. I still recommend that you choose the amount of RAM you need first, then choose the chip family based on the RAM that you have. A lot of times the amount of memory will dictate that. SSD storage size, and then choose the chip variant. We're not seeing really the chip variant because I didn't include to the M4 Pro Mac Mini. I might do that a little bit later on, but as of now, that's what we can see. However, there are some variation that you're going to see in the M4 Pro base versus the M4 Pro top specs SoC that I'm going to show in the 14 16-inch MacBook Pro review video. As I mentioned, $600 jump between all of these, but it's really not the most clear-cut solution, right? It really depends on your workflow and what you do. This is why I do these tests to help share with you so that you can find a machine that is best suited for your workflow. As far as recommendations go, I would probably say for Lightroom Classic, M4 Pro is good. Although with photography app now using a lot of GPU, my recommendation is to start looking at the Max SoC because you are going to start to see a significant improvement in performance when you're really getting into the Mac SoC. When it comes to Photoshop, good, better, best, as you go down the list there, I see the M4 Pro is really good for Photoshop. Just seeing the result this time around and is really a good contender to the M2 Max. When it comes to Capture One, I put the M4 Pro in there. It's good, but I still recommend getting the Max SoC in general. I would probably, at this point in time, maybe take one M1 Max out of the list. I haven't actually done that yet, so this list is going to get revised as I do more videos and recommendation. As far as any of the video app, I put the M4 Pro there as good, but general, if you're doing video, just go for the Max or the Ultra SoC. Double the encoder decoder engine as you go from each family up is something that is definitely worth it, at least personally for me anyway. As far as RAM go, we start at a really good amount now, so we are good to go on that one. However, optimally, I would say, like, you know, 24. I mean, starting on the Pro, that's good. If not, go for more than that if your workflow merits that. And you can see some of the other computers that has more RAM are performing better in certain tasks. When it comes to SSD, recommend at least minimum 512. Personally, for me, I would go with 1 terabyte because the apps are not getting any smaller. We also generate a lot of files, a lot of plist, a lot of things as we're running on our system too. So that's just something to think about on that one. Now, this is the upgrade platform. I'm building up a little bit more room for the other SoC that's going to come. I kind of just pause everything just right at the M4 Pro for now because I'm not really sure how I'm going to recommend this yet until I actually share the next video that's going to come that's going to share with you the M3. So yeah, that's my overall thoughts about this. So Mac Mini M4 Pro, I think, is a good machine, good chip to go in here, although the fan does ramp up a little bit. So really think about your workflow. You work with sound, this may not be the best thing for you, but if you're just doing photography, I don't think that's actually, or video, it's, you know, a killer feature or anything like that that will hinder from what you do. Hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions or comment, do leave them in the comments section. Give this a like, subscribe, and hit the bell when you're new. I'm Art, and I thank you for your time.